So today we're going to look at one of my favourite topics, and that is real aircraft flight plans, because they irrefutably prove that the Earth is a globe. What you're looking at here is a sign on a building in Adak, Alaska, and in this photo you can see myself and my friend Marcus reviewing a real aircraft flight plan while we were refueling in Adak, Alaska. At the time, we were ferrying this small Citation jet from the USA to Australia. And if you're wondering where Adak, Alaska is, it's here on the island chain to the west of Anchorage, just before you cross into Russian airspace. Now, why did we go via Adak? Because these small jets don't have the range to make it from mainland USA to Hawaii. So you need to come up through Canada, Alaska, across Russia, down through Japan, Korea and Indonesia, and back into Australia. I'll share that route in more detail later in this video. So, real aircraft flight plans, the topic that flat earthers are afraid to touch. Why are they afraid? 1. Because a proper analysis of a real flight plan will prove it is calculated for a globe. This is an irrefutable fact. 2. Flat earthers are afraid to expose their own weakness in math, and I think anyone that has dealt with flat earthers for a while will agree that every single one you engage seems to have great difficulty in applying mathematics to the real world. They know that if they tried to analyze a real flight plan, it would easily expose their weakness in math. And we're talking about real aircraft flight plans, a flight plan that a real pilot can use in a real aircraft to fly around the Earth. We're not talking about this type of video, which is about the best we see from flat earthers. Lines drawn with crayons or texters on a flat earth map. And here we can see old Banjo has drawn lines on a globe that are not even close to a great circle route, which really demonstrates his complete lack of understanding of how real flight plans are calculated. This is a real aircraft flight plan. It is one that I have flown myself back in January when we flew the aircraft from Australia to the USA, and this particular sector was from Brisbane to Lihue in Hawaii. Here we can see the fuel details. This is the fuel burn, the time interval, 8 hours and 38 minutes. We have the fixed reserve value of 4,000 pounds. We have the alternate, which was Honolulu. We have the taxi fuel. We have the extra amount, and we have the total on board. It gives us our takeoff weight and our landing weight and the total distance in nautical air miles. As we scroll down, we now see the contingency airports, and this is what we call the ETP pairs, the equi-time point airports. During the progress of the flight, we will have different airports that are the closest suitable alternate, and this is monitored by the calculation of several equi-time points. Further down in the flight plan, we can see the position of ETP1, ETP2, 3 and 4, and those are actually placed in the flight plan. You can see the latitudes and the longitudes for those positions. You can also see that they are calculated for a depressurization event and also for the loss of an engine. So at any time during the flight, if we have a problem, we know immediately which is the nearest suitable airport to begin heading to. And we haven't even got to the good part yet, but the reason I'm covering some of this background information is just to show flat earthers that they are completely out of their depth on this topic. Drawing lines on a piece of paper, drawing texter marks on a globe is not even close to what is required to calculate a real aircraft flight plan. And here is what the route looked like from Brisbane up to Hawaii. And this image shows us the cloud that we can expect to encounter during the trip. If we go back up to the main body of the flight plan, this is where it gets really interesting and very bad for flat Earth. Here we have the waypoints on the left-hand side. Each waypoint is defined by a precise latitude and longitude. We can see the wind. Here it is 090 degrees, 19 knots, and the component M018 means minus 18 knots. That means the component of the wind was giving us an 18 knot headwind. The S represents the severity of turbulence en route. We have true airspeed, 486 knots, ground speed, 451 knots, magnetic course, magnetic heading, the airway that we are using, the minimum sector altitude, which is the lowest safe altitude we can fly that will keep us above any obstacles. We have the distance between each of the waypoints and the distance to run. We have the estimated time en route and the cumulative time. Here we have the ETA based on the flight plan departure time. It doesn't always happen exactly like that, but then you can recalculate these ETAs as you're going. We have the various fuel flows and the predicted amount of fuel on board at each waypoint with the fuel flow per engine. And you can see as the aircraft is getting lighter, the fuel burn is reducing. And here is the part that is checkmate for flat Earth. Game over. We can prove that the distance between any two waypoints on any flight plan used by any aircraft flying around the Earth is irrefutably calculated for a ball Earth. Let's look at this example. Atras to Akumo, 283 nautical miles. We have the precise latitude and longitude of each of these waypoints, and we can apply those to a spherical trigonometry formula to determine what the distance is calculated for a ball. And the formula we can use to prove that flight plan distances are computed for a ball is called the Haversine formula. And the way this works is to calculate an angle in radians from the center of a sphere between 2 points on the surface. Here we can see point A to point B. They have an angular separation measured from the center of the sphere. What the Haversine formula does is calculate that angle in radians. Now, if we consider a unit sphere with a radius of 1 unit, if that angle is 1 radian, the distance between the points on the surface will equal the radius of the sphere. And that is key to understanding how this formula works. Now, for a previous video, I created this simple Great Circle Distance Calculator which uses that formula. Here is the formula in cell C10. You can see it up in the top bar here. This calculates the angle in radians between 2 points on the surface of the Earth. We then multiply it by the actual radius of the Earth to get a distance in kilometers, which we can then calculate to statute miles and nautical miles. And here is the formula. Now remember, this part of the formula that I have highlighted simply calculates the angle in radians from the center of a unit sphere between 2 points on the surface. That part of the formula has no idea about the size of the ball or how far the actual distance is. We then need to multiply that angle by the actual radius of the sphere to get an accurate distance. And here you can see we are using 6371, and that will give us a distance in kilometers. I could use the number 3959, and that would give us an answer in statute miles. So let's take a look at our flight plan pair. Between Atras and Akumo, the flight plan distance is 283 nautical miles. The location of each waypoint is given here in latitude and longitude, and the format is south 09 degrees 48.8 minutes, east 172 degrees 27.7 minutes. When we convert those values to decimal degrees, we have these figures, and when put into our calculator, you can see it results in a distance of 525 kilometers, which calculates to nautical miles 283.6. The flight plan distance 283 miles. So you can see it matches beautifully. You can choose any pair of waypoints on any flight plan and run it through this simple calculator, and you will see that the distance here in nautical miles matches the flight plan distance. And we can use this same formula to verify that the distance between any two waypoints on real aircraft flight charts matches the calculation for a ball 6,371 kilometers in radius. Let's take a look at this South Atlantic chart. And here is the chart opened up, and you can see a route from Ezeiza in Buenos Aires to Cape Town, Africa. It's a non-stop route across the South Atlantic. Now this alone debunks one of the flat earth claims. They state there are no non-stop routes between the southern continents. This is a real aircraft flight chart, and we can see very clearly that we have a route marked. Now each of these waypoints has a specific latitude and longitude, and we have a distance between them. If we plug in those values into my small calculator, you will see that the distances between each waypoint match the calculation for a ball 6,371 kilometers in radius. So let's try it between these waypoints, Morsi to Moons, showing a distance of 457 nautical miles. And here we can see the coordinates for Morsi and Moons, giving us a distance of 457.76 nautical miles. So again, agreeing nicely with the distance shown on the real aircraft flight chart. So it's worth pointing out here that the Haversine formula calculates distances based on a perfect sphere. We know that the Earth is not a perfect sphere. It has an oblateness of 0.3%. Now, to the average person, that is visually indistinguishable. This is one of my earlier videos where I have a perfect circle and one flattened by 0.3%. They look the same, and that means calculations based on a perfect sphere are close enough to be within 1 nautical mile for typical waypoint distances. And we do have a more accurate formula that will factor in the oblateness of the Earth. That is called Vincenti's formula, and that is how distances are computed between GPS coordinates and how real aircraft flight plans are calculated, because they do factor in the oblateness of the Earth. The reason I used the Haversine formula is because it is in fact based on a perfect sphere, and you can see that the Earth is obviously close enough to a perfect sphere for this calculation to give us distances that match real flight plan distances. So when are you flat earthers going to grow up and stop hiding behind your keyboards, behind your block buttons, and deleting my comments asking you to address real aircraft flight plans? Look at this, fellas. It's just embarrassing for flat earth. More than 3 years ago, in December 2016, I posted this video, a friendly challenge to all flat earth believers. In this challenge, they simply had to produce a flight plan based on a flat earth. Not one flat earther can do it. Over 100,000 views later and 3,000 comments, all I get are excuses and insults. Just try to imagine how much I'm laughing at the entire flat earth community. Not one of you can produce a flight plan that works. I can checkmate you easily with real aircraft flight plans every time. So let's sit back and enjoy all the comments from flat earthers who immediately turn up in damage control with nothing more than excuses and insults. Bring it on, fellas. It makes me laugh every time because I know you've got nothing. As many of you are aware by now, I spent several years flying helicopters and jets for the New South Wales Police Force. But that wasn't the only flying I was doing at the time. We had a fabulous roster where we only had to work 16 days every 4 weeks, and it was flexible enough that we could string together the 12 days off during those 4 weeks into one single period. During that time, I would take the opportunity to fly small jets like this all around the world on delivery and ferry flights. This is a Citation 3 in Australia just before we headed off towards the USA. And here I am standing on the stairs just before we close the door. So even though my two flying jobs were quite different, they were mutually beneficial. My commander at the Police Aviation Unit was very happy to have an experienced international jet captain on his team. And when I was travelling overseas, ferrying these small aircraft, being a sworn police officer with a badge opened up many doors. Customs and security agencies around the world were always happy to help out a fellow police officer. Here I am in one of the LAPD helicopters. I never missed an opportunity to go and mix with my friends around the world. Here is wifey on one of the police motorcycles. This is during one of the ferry trips. I just took a visit to Disneyland, police helicopter, and that was on the trip back from the USA in a small jet, which we'll look at now. So what I've done here in Google Earth is mark out the route of one of my favourite trips. Now, quite often we would ferry an aircraft over to the States and get the airlines back, or vice versa. But on this particular trip, we ferried one aircraft to the US, picked up a second one and flew it back. Firstly, it was a Citation 3 out of Cairns. We went to Nauru, Majuro Atoll, Midway Island and Shemya in the Aleutians before heading into Anchorage, Alaska. From there, we flew down to Texas. I then boarded a commercial aircraft back up to Anchorage to pick up the second aircraft, and we flew that one out to Adak, through Russia, over Japan, down through Jeju in Korea, Manila, Ambon, Darwin, Alice Springs, and back to Sydney. And that was all in a period of 9 days while I had my days off from the New South Wales Police Air Wing. So these photos are in no particular order, but they're all taken on that 9-day trip. This is over the Aleutian Islands. We actually had to declare an emergency and divert to Shemya, which was a military airbase, as the weather had deteriorated in Adak and we couldn't get in there. This is Adak on the return home trip. This is the small Citation jet being refueled in Adak. Some of the weather near the intertropic convergence zone. This is in Russia, and this was our handler, Natasha. The first time I met her, we opened the door just after landing, and she walked up and said, "Welcome to Russia. My name is Natasha." And I said, "Of course it is." That's in Korea. Jeju. Refueling in Korea. That's in Manila on the way back. That is Alice Springs in Australia. As I said, they're in no particular order. This is in Nauru. This is the Citation 3 that we flew out of Australia. It was being sold in the US. This is the weather when we landed on Shemya. We actually conducted an instrument approach right down to the ground. As I said, we had to declare an emergency. It's the only time I've had to do it in my career. Refueling in Nauru. Now this is on Midway Island. The period of operation there is quite restricted because they have about 1 million albatross. So if you're going to fly during daylight hours, you're almost guaranteed to hit a bird. We had to arrive at night and depart early in the morning before sunrise. Albatross everywhere. Midway Island. These are the two pilots that I was flying across to the USA with. Such a beautiful place, just remote, and there were no tourists at all. That's inside the Citation 3. It's always fun flying an empty aircraft. This is in Anchorage, Alaska, after departing Shemya. Now this is in Seattle, and we actually crossed paths with the two aircraft. The one on the right was the one I was flying to Texas, and this one was being flown single pilot by Marcus up to Alaska, where he waited for me to join him for the trip home. That's flying out of Seattle. As I said, flying an empty aircraft is always fun. There's one of the other pilots just having a rest. One of the hotels in Alaska. That is the final delivery point for the aircraft when it was being sold. That was my flight back up to Anchorage. On the commercial flight back up to Anchorage. And this is where I met the little Citation jet at the FBO in Alaska. Marcus and I on the way. This is coming into Adak, refueling in Adak, an overview of the airport, and departing. This is Russia. This is Marcus and his wife, and the beauty of doing these trips is we could bring passengers along. This is in Russia. About 30 seconds after this, I had two 7-foot-tall police officers walk up to me and say, "No photos." So I stopped. This is in Korea. Korea. And back in Australia. Thanks for watching.